Real conversations. This is Real Talk with RAFF.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Real Talk with RAFF. We are in the middle of a huge election, and we wanted to get some perspective from someone who is nonpartisan. Laura Smits is the communications director for the Connecticut League of Women Voters. Welcome to Real Talk with RAFF.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm glad to be here. Happy
You
to
are
help.
a nonprofit organization started with the 19th Amendment back in the 1920s. You do a lot of outreach with candidates. You must be very busy in this election cycle.
This is our crunch time for sure, especially at the end of the cycle. We start getting revved up like right during the summer. We do a lot of our work, and we get ready for materials that we may need to give our local chapters so that they can share with voters what's on the ballot, what the big issues are, and make sure that they know where to vote, who are they going to vote for. They can decide that. We don't tell them, but we give them information about the issues and the things that are concerning to most voters in each cycle.
So you do a lot of education, a lot of outreach, trying to get people to learn a little bit more. Is that tricky?
It can be. It's a very different world that we live in. Social media has changed everything. We are also aware that cable news and 24/7 news changes everything. So we have to make sure that we're covering those bases so that we're meeting people where they are. It used to be back in the day, we'd have tables outside of libraries, which we still do, but it's not just that anymore. We have to be on social media. This year we have billboards. You may have seen our billboards on 91 and 95, telling people to register, how important it is, that it matters. So many folks think because we're in Connecticut, we're not a swing state, that their vote is, that why bother? Why bother? And that's really not a good thing because we're not just voting for president. The local elections are incredibly important to your life. Those are the things that determine how your schools are, how your roads are kept, all the things that really impact your daily life. The president's important, but it's not the only thing we're voting for, especially this year.
It's interesting that you bring that up because I have encountered that as well, that people feel, well, Connecticut is not a swing state, so it doesn't really matter if I vote. But your day-to-day life and how you pay taxes, and who represents you and your community at the state capitol, in local races, and also Congress, because we could see
Correct.
a change
Yes.
in the House and the Senate in Congress. So it is very important that people vote.
Yes, it is, and it's especially with these races being close. I mean, I think the case for your vote not counting gets weaker and weaker every time. Every vote does count. We see how, and people are like, well, you know, it doesn't matter. I'm like, well, if it didn't matter, why would so many people, and this state included, try to take it away or try to make it more difficult for people to vote? Clearly, it matters.
Right, and normally in a presidential election, you're going to get a high voter turnout, but I would tend to think that early voting is really going to bring more people out. I haven't seen so much overwhelming positive
Correct.
reaction in the past week and a half to early voting. People are really excited about it. They like it. And I will say this on a somewhat political note, Republicans in the legislature really did not want it. Many of them voted against it.
Correct.
But now are, kind of promoting it on social media. So I think maybe even they are seeing and that, it's a good thing for a lot of people because who knows what could happen tomorrow. Something could happen or you can't show up on election day. So your vote will count.
Absolutely, and it's over 350,000 people have already voted in Connecticut, which is phenomenal. I don't know if you remember during COVID when the Secretary of the State's office sent absentee ballot applications, not ballots, applications out to every registered voter. We had almost 80% turnout that year during a pandemic. So clearly people in Connecticut want more opportunities to vote and want more ways to vote. The drop boxes are incredibly popular. That's another way to keep people safe. It's another easy thing to do. You save a stamp, you just drive by City Hall, drop it in the box, and it's good to go. This year on the ballot, as you know, there is a question for the voters, and I hope everybody votes yes to expand for the legislature to expand absentee ballot access for all voters. You don't have to have an excuse. One of the things that became very apparent to us during the 2020 race, and we started talking about early voting before it was voted on, is people were like, don't we have that already? don't we have no excuse absentee ballot? We're Connecticut. We're a progressive state. And we're like, yes, we are. But we also have a constitution. We're the Constitution state. So all of our election laws are written in our Constitution. So modernizing or changing anything, we have to go right to the people and get their permission and let the legislature figure out the details. Which
right,
is
and
what,
that's how early voting came about,
correct,
right? A lot
correct.
of people support. But I guess you could argue, too, though, why would you need so much absentee balloting or no excuse absentee ballots if people can early vote?
That's a good question, and I think we're going to see the difference in what happens once we get absentee ballots as a no excuse. It will change a little bit. It'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. There was concern, certainly in the beginning when we had early voting for the primaries, where not a lot of people go in the primaries because we're a closed primary state. So people are like, oh, it doesn't work, it's too expensive. Well, here we are, and now there's so many people taking advantage of it that it's very popular, and I think it's going to be a good thing. I think giving people more options is always a good thing.
One of the things that I have noticed over the past few elections, and I think others too, especially absentee ballots, a lot of people in Fairfield County take advantage of those absentee ballots because, let's face it, a lot of people work in New
Correct.
York, and it's
Commuters.
very convenient for them. And coincidentally, with early voting, other than West Hartford, I think the top three cities and towns with the highest early voter turnout are all in Fairfield County. So it really works for a lot of people in that part of the state, and now we're finding in this part of the state as well.
Yeah, I think the commuter population is very impacted. I know when I work elections, there's always that fear that the last train is delayed. And we've had folks walking in at like 5 of 8 because the train was delayed and they couldn't get in there. So if you're in line, obviously you can vote, but you don't want to, this way you don't have to risk that anymore. You can get it done before you go to work or weeks before you go to work and not have to worry about it. So it is a convenience that people really like.
You mentioned that you're a former registrar.
Correct.
In Weston?
Weston, which is right near Westport.
What were some of the concerns that you had with elections? And I think now I'm hearing from registrars is that 2 weeks of early voting may be too much.
I know that is a concern, and that's really mostly about staffing. It is a cost to a town, obviously, and I know the Secretary of the State's office had asked for money for the towns. For some it was a lot, for some it wasn't enough, so you have to balance. Yeah, and you have to balance it out between, we have 169 municipalities, so big cities, small towns, different needs for different towns. So that will have to be adjusted. I think we're still in the learning curve phase of what all this is going to shake out cost-wise, but I know there was a concern about staffing. But I do know I voted early in Norwalk. I have a wedding to go to this weekend, so I didn't want to risk airplane travel being delayed. And it was I had to wait. The only thing that kept me from voting early was the fact there weren't parking spaces. Once I got inside, it was quick and easy, but getting a parking space was a challenge. But there were plenty of people there on hand to help, just because we don't know right now. This is our first big general election, and it's a big year, right? It's a 2024 cycle, so we're on a presidential cycle, so it's always going to be very popular, and more people are going to vote. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. I think the novelty we'll get to an adjustment period once we figure out how this all works.
Well, I voted early because I think I wanted to take part of something that is new, although I traditionally like to go to the polls on Election Day. Maybe it's because of the bake sales, but I think the pandemic kind of put a damper on that.
It did, yes.
It did. But I think that during the primary, early voting, they didn't get a big turnout because there weren't unaffiliated voters.
Right.
It's
never
not
a big
an open
turnout.
primary.
Right.
So now you're seeing them. So they are having to hire more staff, and plus the fact that it's all districts in one. Whereas when you vote on Election Day, you're going to only your polling location.
Correct.
So they do have to hire more people, and the concern is, can they continue to absorb that cost, and should the legislature put in some money to help them with that?
That'll be the big question. I think this year is the first year it's going to be very busy just because people have never done it before. I think over time it'll shake out since we have 2 weeks for a general election. That is a lot of time. The reason that it is a lot of time, and there's 2 weekends involved, and there's extended days and nights. So, for example, tomorrow night, Halloween, is an 8 p.m. close. It's an 8 a.m. till 8 p.m., so that'll be a busy night, and it should be a fun night. I would like to work that night, actually. It could be a good time.
Right. I don't think a lot of people knew that there was early voting on the weekends. That was something.
Yes. So we have 2 weekends, which is terrific.
I think maybe the media, and myself included, probably needed to do a better job at that. And there really haven't been many problems, although I know in Stonington there were some issues where someone gave out about 500 ballots to voters in the wrong district.
Right.
So that's an issue. Is that enough to, say that early voting is not good and that we need to do a better job, I would think?
Yeah, I don't think that's enough. I think most people were able to do that, and they corrected that as quickly as they could. There's always going to be a little glitches when you start something new and people aren't really comfortable with doing it yet. Having multiple districts is a confusion, but registrars have been handling this kind of stuff for a long time, so they're pretty much ready for it, I believe.
Speaking of registrars, so yesterday I heard a disheartening statistic. Senator Richard Blumenthal said nearly 40% of election workers have either been threatened or intimidated. And that's unfortunate because it's hard enough to find people to work the polls anyway, right?
Correct.
And so now adding to that people don't feel safe. And I was in Waterbury this week talking to the registrars, and they are bringing on extra security. Now, it's not uncommon to have police around polling locations on Election Day, but they want more people to feel that there is safety. How big of a concern is that, and are you hearing that from poll workers and people who handle ballots?
I've heard some. I've also experienced a little bit of that, not too much, not violence necessarily, but some kind of, verbal threats, because when you do go into a polling location, we have the 75-foot line, right? And there's a 75-foot line that says you cannot campaign or do any kind of campaign literature. And we have seen in the past, I'd say 5 to 10 years, people trying to push that envelope, wearing hats with slogans on them or having T-shirts on with a certain candidate. Well, if you're a poll worker, you're going to tell that person either take that off, go outside, change your clothes, whatever, take that pin off, put that, and it's always been something that people just kind of said, okay, fine, whatever. And I've noticed in the past 10 years, I'd say, it gets a little more, people get a little more strident about it. Well, what do you mean I can't? It's a free country. Well, it's a free country in front of that 75-foot line. So I think that it's definitely, we have definitely seen this across the country, and I think because we are a 24/7 news cycle and we see other states, it's happening in other states, that people think it's happening all over. It's happened, it hasn't happened here yet, but I think having extra police presence certainly tamps down that kind of intimidation. It makes people think twice about doing something like that. It's really unfortunate that people feel the need to push themselves on to others that way.
I think the temperature, no doubt, is a lot hotter. And I'll share an experience. I remember when Linda McMahon ran for Senate in Connecticut, and her husband, Vince McMahon, head of WWE, there were people at the polls with WWE stickers, and so they were talked to and told them that they couldn't stand there near the polls with their paraphernalia. And the next day I came to work and there was a big box on my desk with a WWE T-shirt from Vince McMahon. So he was trying to have a humor about it, but I think those days may be far and few between now, and I don't see a lot of lightheartedness. I think the rhetoric that we're experiencing, the anger in our communities where people can't even discuss politics amongst friends and family.
Right.
I'm not sure how we got to this point, but we're here, aren't we?
It's much more polarized than it used to be, and I think it's a lot easier to be polarized in a country now where everybody can go into their own little world and never have to leave it. Gone are the days when Walter Cronkite was giving you the version of the news, and we all accepted those as factual information. Well, now you can just change the channel if you don't like what you hear and find your people, whoever those people are, and never have to interact with somebody who doesn't agree with you, even as civilized. I mean, Thanksgiving's coming up. Everybody's worried about Thanksgiving. We've been worried about Thanksgiving for like 10 years now. So it's kind of like, okay, what are you going to do with your family members? So I think it's a lot easier to stay in your own place and never hear a discerning word against, and never having a conversation.
Yeah, but we've always had conversations, let's be honest.
It seems like we're not having conversations anymore. People are a lot more reluctant to to state what they feel about a certain issue, afraid that someone will not like them or, disown them.
So
at some
Senator
level.
Blumenthal's pushing for legislation that would strengthen laws that are to protect election workers, but also not allow people to bring firearms to ballot locations or voting. And I was really surprised by that, that you can.
Right.
And that sounds, especially in today's climate, a really bad plan for someone to bring a firearm to a polling location.
I agree. I don't really understand why you would feel the need to bring that with you into a polling location and leave it in the car. I know that we have concealed carry laws in Connecticut, which is fine, but I do think it's unfortunate that we have to go to that place where we might need a law against it. It should be common sense, but it seems like we have to legislate common sense these days.
So you do work all year long.
Correct.
I mean, it's not just during an election, but this is a busy time for you. Tell us what the League of Women Voters will be doing now before next Tuesday to try either to get people out to the polls and educate people about the election.
Sure. We've basically, we start, a lot of our outreach this year has been to first-time voters, young people. We've done a lot of work I've done work at Norwalk Community College. A lot of our folks have gone up to UConn to make sure that the younger people are paying attention. This is their world, certainly. My generation is on its way down. Their generation is on their way up. So I think it's important for them to get involved earlier. We do struggle with some of the misinformation that's out there about our elections. So many folks think that this is happening in Arizona, this is happening in Georgia, it must be happening here. It's not.
What are you referring to?
Well, just for example, I met someone the other day who told me that they were setting ballot boxes on fire in Connecticut.
Oh,
they are not. That was in Arizona, and I think in Oregon and Washington recently. So that was one thing. And I think the problem is now you hear it on the news and you think, oh, it must be happening here. And it's not. One of the upsides to all of the states doing their own elections is that we have control over some of those things. And Connecticut has been pretty good about, we're very pro-voting in Connecticut. We don't have a lot of people that are that disgruntled that they go to extreme measures, but we have to be aware that it's always a possibility, especially now.
I think early voting has been very successful also in getting new voters.
Correct.
We've seen some of the numbers where they're really making a big push, and I think partly because they don't have to necessarily show up to vote on that one particular day, that they have more flexibility, that's a turn on for a lot of young people. And I've met them, and they're very energized about being able to vote.
Yes, and that's it. That instant gratification that you can get from early voting is nice because you don't have to worry about a line necessarily. But even though I've heard there are some lines in Connecticut, which is unusual for Connecticut. Most people just walk in and walk out within 10, 15 minutes. But it is nice to get it done. It's nice to get that off your list and not have to worry about it. So I think that's terrific. So we've gone to schools. I've been making presentations at some churches, at some organizations that reach out to us every year and say, hey, can you do a presentation about the history of the league as well as what are we looking at this year for issues that people are concerned about.
I'd like to circle back to something that you said earlier, and that is, the influence of social media.
Correct.
And I think there's so much out there now that people do tend to get wrong information or believe things that may not be accurate, and so it can be very damaging. And you and I had a conversation about this before we sat down about Twitter, which is now X, and there's a lot of anger out there with people and backlash to the point where some, and including myself, are a little hesitant to even say anything on there at all. But the point I want to make is that there's a lot of information out there, and a lot of young people go to those sites to get their information, and it may not be accurate. So how do you get the right information to people about what's happening in their state and what they need to know?
Well, we are on Facebook, we are on Instagram, and we are on Twitter. And one of the things that we try to do, because so many young people especially go to TikTok for their sources, and we try to, when we put out information about elections, here's how you register, here's how you vote, we get it direct from the source. We get it from the Secretary of the State's office, and we always hook back into that because we know that's the best information we can have. So we try to counter some of that information. We also have a bunch of posts that we put up about how to how to look at information. And I did a book group recently in Norwalk for our league with a book called Verified. And it's a really nice little book, and it's basically teaching people how to look at online media and sort through it. And they use a great acronym called SIFT. And when you're looking at something online, the first is S, and that's stop. Stop and take a look. Think about what you're looking at, first of all. And before you have a skeptical eye, not a jaundiced eye, but a skeptical eye. Is this too good to be true? So kind of stop and take a look. Investigate the source. Again, find another source. If it's a really important story, it's a big story, the major journalism people are going to cover it, the news sources that you can trust, and then trace it back to the original content. And the obvious example that I can use, that recent example, is the Haitian immigrants eating cats and dogs. Well, that was traced back to a Facebook post by someone who lost a cat. It wasn't a source, it wasn't an investigation, it was somebody's personal opinion and their personal Facebook page.
So we went from a missing cat, which happens every day,
right,
to a political candidate using that to say Haitians are eating their cats.
Correct. And the problem is now with misinformation, it gets out there so far ahead of everybody else. It's hard to pull it back. It's like toothpaste out of a tube. It's just not going to get put back in. So we try to counter it with the facts, and we always talk about facts matter. Here's the actual situation. So we do counter it with factual information. Some of it gets through. Obviously, we're not going to be able to contain all of it, but we do try to find a relevant source to say, here's why this matters. We use PolitiFact is another source that is good for that kind of stuff. Snopes, all of the usual sources. And I always also make the point that don't forget, Google is a search engine. It's not a truth engine.
Huh?
So, I mean, that's why when you go look to buy a pair of jeans or pants, 20 of the first lists are Amazon, right? Until you get down to another source. Well, it's kind of like in a supermarket shelf. Somebody paid for that spot at eye level. And it's the same thing with the Google search. All the really good quality information might be on the second or third page, but very few people go to that second or third page of results. We all stay on the first page and take the first thing that comes up if it looks good. Now, sometimes if it's a good source, like if it's a Washington Post or a New York Times or a journalist source, that's fine. You can stop there. But if it's not, you got to drill down and keep going, keep looking. So people should take some time before they just believe everything they read on the internet, especially before they share it.
What do you think? I mean, now that we're talking about journalism and some of the media sources, newspapers like the Washington Post have been endorsing candidates
for a long time.
For a very, very long time. There may have been some years where they didn't, but the recent controversy where the Post was going to endorse Kamala Harris, and then Jeff Bezos pulled the plug at the last minute saying they didn't want to do that, they're not going to do that anymore, and the editor-at-large resigning. Is that an indication that corporate America is too involved in our democracy?
I believe so. I think that once you have corporate ownership of the media, this stuff is going to happen more and more. Rupert Murdoch is another example of someone who, it's like a tabloid kind of a thing. Yes, he has the Wall Street Journal, so far so good, but you should always be suspect when somebody has done something for a long time and then just decides not to. And of course, now we can trace it back to the owner, and that's not good.
Right, who would be concerned if Trump were to win this election, that if he went against him, that could hurt his business, Amazon.
It could hurt his business, right. And who knows what could happen after that. How far do you take that? We have free speech in this country, and it's the First Amendment. It's the biggest one we have. And if you can't trust the media, we're in trouble.
Yeah, it's a tough time to be a journalist these days. And, I'm not going to say that everyone is doing a very good job, but there are good journalists out there who have checks and balances, who do their work and do it right. And we need that, because without media, where would we be, right? And from the basic level in your city and town. I mean, if no one's keeping an eye on people. So it's very unfortunate that we've come to this point, and I worry about democracy.
I think we are worried. I mean, one of our mission is, empowering voters, defending democracy, and it gets harder every year. It's much harder than it used to be.
So tell us, one of the things that I remember always with the League of Women Voters, you did a lot of debates.
Yes.
But you don't do those so much anymore. How come?
Well, we've done them in the past, and one of the things that we have encountered in the past 5 to 10 years is a lot of debate reluctance on the part of candidates to participate. This is unfortunate. I've done some debates. We still do debates, but we also have specific rules for who we will work with. Candidates come to us all the time and say, I want to debate, I want to debate. We're like, well, no. If you'd like a debate, that's great. We will reach out to your local league and they'll help you form a debate, because we try to be nonpartisan about it. We handle each candidate in the same way. We email them the rules. We do have criteria. You can't just have a bumper sticker and a Facebook page and expect to stand on the stage with an incumbent who has 20 years experience. That's just not going to happen. So there are criteria for who gets to be on a debate stage, and a lot of the candidates aren't comfortable with that anymore. We've had Republicans and Democrats from both parties pull out of debates for lots of reasons. They wanted to control the debate. We're like, no, we control the debate. So we have a policy, we can't have an empty chair debate. So if we have a debate set up and a candidate pulls out at the last minute, we can't have that debate, because that's not a debate with one person, right?
One of the things that I think is unfortunate about the political system is that there are different parties and different candidates, but when it all comes down to, it's just the Republican and the Democrat, it's very hard for independents or Green Party or whatever to be part of that arena.
Right. I think it's difficult. We have a bicameral system. We don't have a parliamentary system where all the parties get together and do consensus. So it's unfortunate that is the case. Unfortunately, a lot of the third-party candidates act as spoilers sometimes, and at least in our country, that's the way it's been. So that's always something that concerns us. But I read it recently in a New Yorker article about this, that our polarization has also become amplified by Citizens United, where the money that people collect for elections used to go to the parties. Used to be given one or the other. Now it goes to PACs. Now it's about PACs. And that's really unfortunate, because PAC money is dark money. And dark money, democracy dies in darkness, Washington Post, right? So we need to get more sunshine on those things and keep things more transparent, and we're all about transparency and democracy.
Too much money, because we understand that, and we can see that all the way from the presidential race to some of state races. The more money you have, the more able you are to get your message out. You have been a really good person to have on Real Talk with RAFF.
Thank you.
Fantastic, and giving voters a lot of information. So I want to thank you for joining us. Where are you going to be on Election Day, quickly?
I'm home. I'll be helping out at the polls, not in the polling place, but outside, getting the word out about the question on the ballot.
Good.
Which is very important.
All right, so we want to give our voters some information.
Correct.
Early voting still is happening until Sunday, November 3rd. The election is next Tuesday. If you are not registered to vote, I believe there is still time to do so.
And there's also same-day registration on Election Day.
Correct, and you can go to your town hall or the town website to get more information. I believe you can also get that on the Secretary of the State's website. Can I get it on your website too?
Yes, you can go to our website, lwvct.org, or vote411.org, which will give you a personalized ballot for your address.
Laura Smits, you've been wonderful. Thank you so much, and let's get through this election and get more people out to vote. Thank you for joining us on Real Talk with RAFF.
Thank you for having me,
Thank you,
Susan.
everybody, for listening, and please, go vote.